Hi, I'm Pastor Richard Stadler, and this is Ann Carter, and we're here to talk to you about the Sunday readings coming up for this coming Sunday. And we're going to be talking about the readings for the 10th Sunday after Pentecost. The Old Testament lesson is the story of Elijah caving in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 9 to 18. The epistle lesson is from Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 10, verses 5 to 15. And then the gospel reading is from Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33, where Jesus calms the storm and Peter comes walking to him on the water. So there's a lot of interesting readings here, and we're going to look for a way of tying them together. So Ann, if you look at these three, is there a theme that seems to run through them, or a thread that we can find that will people can look for?
When I looked at them, all of them, I found that God revealed himself in different ways in each place. That he revealed himself in this silence with Elijah. He revealed himself as this man who could walk on water in the New Testament. And that God comes to you in different ways. Mm-hmm. That was mine. Okay,
and let's look for that as we take a look at these. Let's start with 1 Kings chapter 19.
Mm-hmm. A reading from 1 Kings. At Horeb, the mount of God, Elijah came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And the Lord said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Assyria. And Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him.
Where Elijah, just to set the stage for this, Elijah has taken on Ahab and Jezebel, the wicked royalty of Israel. And they have sponsored over 400 prophets of Baal, the false god. And so he challenges the prophets of Baal to a contest. And they have to each call on their God, and their God has to come down and consume the sacrifice that each of them has prepared. And Elijah wins it, hands down. And all of the 400 prophets of Baal, and Ahab and Jezebel are out for him. And he flees all the way down to Mount Horeb, down in the Sinai wilderness. And he's caving in there. And he's feeling like he's the only one left. And God comes to him. And so what are the things that drive him to hide out in this cave?
Well, that's what I find fascinating, is here Elijah has just witnessed, God has revealed himself again by fire from heaven consuming. Then he reveals himself, Elijah has prayed, and this cloud has come, and he knows that rain is finally going to come into the land. And then Jezebel puts a hit on him, and he runs afraid.
Yeah.
That's fascinated me, that this man who has witnessed the power of God is afraid of a contract out on his life from Jezebel. She must have had formidable reputation, or else Elijah was just exhausted.
And maybe all of us can identify with that.
Yeah.
Because as brave as we can be at other moments, there are other times when we just seem to cave in.
Yeah.
And different stresses can do that to us.
Yeah. And I can't imagine what it's like to be filled with the power of God.
Yeah.
With that kind of energy and that kind of focus and that kind of revelation. And it's evidenced because he left, he laid down and he slept, and an angel woke him up and told him to eat. And he told him that you're going to have to eat this food because you've got a long journey ahead of you. Yeah. So finally, after he rested and after he ate, he was able to make it, incidentally, to the same place that Moses was.
Yeah, right. And
I think
so there's a connection there. And especially when he says his reason for being there, when God's voice comes to him and says, Elijah, what are you doing here? And he says, well, your people have all forsaken the covenant. And that covenant was struck with Israel at that same place. And so he retreats to that place. And so maybe not all of his motivation was fear or cowardice. Maybe there was also a disgust with all the people that he had been trying to keep faithful to God. And he's feeling like the only one left. And so he just decides, okay, I'm going to get as far away as I can from this threat, but also I'm just going to take some R&R, and who knows how long he was planning to deny his prophet role, you know. But God comes to him, and God reinstates him. But he doesn't do it with power, and he doesn't do it with earthquake, fire, a strong wind that ripped apart the mountain. He does it with a still, small voice that offers him good news. Hey, there are still 7,000 in Israel. You're not the only one left. There are 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. And I think God comes to us that way sometimes when we're scared. And he may shake our lives up, you know, with different things and allow certain things to shake us up. But he comes to us with the still, small, confirming voice of the gospel saying, you're not alone. And to me, that's the great advantage of worship, is that we gather together with other worshipers when we do feel like I'm the only person out there in my society that believes in Jesus, or at work or school or wherever I am. And he reminds us, no, there's a whole bunch of others here who are here to worship the God.
I'm going to back up just a little bit, though, and say where God comes first, where the first true, where he understands that this is God, is in that silence. And again, when Jesus gets into the boat, he gets into the boat and the wind ceased. And again, I think there was a silence, and I don't know what the significance of that is exactly, unless it just, when all of the other distractions of what you think God might be, or what you are experiencing in life, and all of a sudden it's all taken away and it's quiet, then the voice can come through.
You know, there's, in the book of Revelation, between the different revelations, there is this moment of silence. And it's like that. It's a kind of a pregnant silence. It gives you a chance to kind of think about all the things and hear the voice of God coming through. And so that might be one way of connecting all of those silences, that they give the sinner a chance to hear the gracious voice of God.
I don't know that we respect silence enough in our culture now in the 21st century, of always having our phone on, of always being plugged into our computer or iPad, always having chartered cable on, always having to check for texts. We don't give ourselves time just to sit. I mean, Elijah was out there in the desert. What else is there to be? And then with the disciples, they were with their Lord.
I don't know if this is relevant. I don't want to take us too far afield, but when I first married my wife, she would not always talk all the time. And so I figured she was angry at me because I identified silence with someone being peeved. So I finally said to her one day, I said, what'd I do wrong? And she said, nothing. Why? I said, you're silent. She said, I've got nothing to say. And I thought, oh, here I've been misreading her silence all this time. And she felt no need to just fill the air with sound, you know, and with talk. And we've spent many hours together and not talking at all, and just simply enjoying our presence together. And I think the same is true about these silences, that God gives us these silences. When Jesus goes up in the mountain to pray before the storm in the gospel reading, do you think he was jabbering to God the whole night, praying to God? I don't think so. I think sometimes he may have just been savoring the communion with his Heavenly Father, you know, and that can be our way of praying too sometimes, is just to get away from the noisy crowd and all the white sound that we've got.
And sometimes we react to God's silence as though it's a rejection, as though he's angry with us about something, and we try to figure it out, when instead all he wants us to do is just listen. Just listen.
And enjoy.
Just be.
Yeah, right.
Just be. Yeah, we've just come from a week in the North Woods, just sitting on the end of the dock, just being, hearing the loons, being around the water, just being.
A reading from Romans. For Moses writes about the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who does the commandments shall live by them. But the righteousness based on faith says, do not say in your heart who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. For the Scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. For the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news.
In Romans chapter 10, he seems to be talking about righteousness, and I think that term can be very confusing to Christians.
Yes.
Because it was to Luther, and he struggled with that because he identified righteousness only as God's righteous demands because he was a righteous God. And he never saw, until he understood the gospel, that righteousness can also mean God's gift of righteousness that covers our unrighteousness, that he imputes to us. And so in this section, I think the same misunderstanding could easily warp our understanding of what the epistle is really getting at. And when we get down on ourselves and realize that we have not been righteous people, you know, where does my comfort come from? It doesn't come from screwing up my motivation and saying, okay, I got to work harder, I got to try harder. It comes from being silent, listening to the voice of God saying, as many of you who are baptized into Christ have been clothed with Christ in his righteousness.
Yeah, it is accepting the gift.
That's right. And that sometimes is done not with a lot of boisterous hallelujahs, but just with silent acceptance.
Keeping God as God and not trying to make ourselves as God.
Yeah. And when he ends this epistle section by saying, how beautiful are the feet of those who have brought good news, it made me wonder, who are all the people that you can think of that have brought the good news to you during your Christian experience, that have fed your faith?
Lots and lots, from Sunday school teachers in the beginning, from, I was parochial educated, so my teachers, pastors, I think more important though, friends who just lived the life and who were there to listen to me. And who were there to offer me guidance, and who were there just to love me.
Yeah. And parents.
Yeah, certainly, yes, parents. And my children.
Yeah.
My children, I think, almost most of anybody who taught me what unconditional love was and introduced me to that revelation of God.
And I see the same thing for my grandchildren now, is that watching how innocently they just profess the faith, or they prayed with us at McDonald's or someplace else, just really builds me up in my faith to see them reflecting it, you know.
How simply they love.
Yeah. And I'm sure other people have had coaches or scout leaders or other people who have had that kind of a positive Christian influence just because they lived their faith and didn't try to impose it on their kids, but just shared it with them or lived it. Yeah.
The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God."
What is the connection then to the gospel lesson for this week?
The connection of the Old and the Epistle to the Gospel.
Maybe if we look at storms.
Yeah, and I think the revelation of just the revelation that whatever you go through, Jesus is there. I get in a simplified way
But
to say for today.
that's a good reminder. Mm-hmm. It's a very important one because we can easily forget that. Mm-hmm. And when he had just finished feeding the 5,000. He sends the disciples in a boat away so he could be by himself. Then he dismisses the crowd and sends them home. So he's all by himself. He's up there praying. And during the 4th watch of the night, which means probably around 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, the disciples have been fighting the waves. And in the northern part of the Sea of Galilee, there's like a wind tunnel created between the Arbel Cliffs and the other mountains. And the wind comes whipping across the north end of the Sea of Galilee, can turn up a storm very, very suddenly. And 4 6-foot high whitecaps. So the disciples may have been actually rowing into that in order to get to the other side of the lake from where they were leaving on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus then comes walking to them. And they think it's a ghost. And they're scared. And they're already scared maybe by the wind and the sea and wondering if this boat is going to go under. But Jesus identifies who he is. And then bless his heart, I love Peter at this point. You know, he gets a bad rap for his denying his Lord. But he's the first one out of the boat.
Yeah.
He says to Jesus, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. And I'm ready to run." Yeah. And Jesus says, "Come," one word. And boom, he's out of the boat. I think, but what happens to him?
Well, he starts looking at all of the cares of this world. He starts looking at the waves and he starts to sink. He takes his eyes off Jesus.
Exactly. And he starts to go down. And what I love is the reaction of Jesus, because he doesn't make him suffer a little bit first. He says immediately he reaches out and grabs his hand and rescues him and then brings him into the boat and calms the storm. As you mentioned earlier, he creates this silence and everybody is awed. This is the Son of God. No, this is not just a prophet or a teacher.
They've had quite a day.
Yeah.
They witnessed Jesus feeding 5,000 people by however he did that, broke the loaves and broke and gave the fish. And then they're out on the storm and they're exhausted. They're exhilarated, but they're exhausted. It's what, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly.
And this figure comes across. They're afraid for their lives. And then a day with Jesus is not an ordinary day. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And if you live your life with Jesus, expect that there might be quiet moments, but don't be surprised when he allows you into a storm, but know that he'll get you back out of it.
That's right. And he's there with you in the middle of the storm. And some of the storms are outside us, and some of the storms are inside us. And in either situation, this story reminds us that he is more powerful than the storms. And so keep your eyes focused on Jesus and keep your ears listening to the still small voice of his gospel assurance. So this is great readings.
Great readings.